It's not fair. That's what I yelled into the phone last week as I was talking with a friend across the country. It's not fair. Why does she get what I want, even though I'm doing everything right and everything I should be? Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'm here to prove to you that pastors are people too. How many of you have uttered the words, "It's not fair"? I know every one of you have. I should be seeing hands up all over. I remember this one time, I used to work for the state, and I was a salaried employee, which meant I worked 40 hours a week, give or take. And that meant that you worked until the work was done. Sometimes that meant 40 hours a week, sometimes it was more than 40 hours a week. And I remember having this conversation one week with my boss. He says, "Emily, we have this project this week that has to be done by Friday. You're going to have to work overtime." And I said, "It's not fair," because the secretary of my agency, which, by the way, the secretary is second to the governor, he was the dude in charge. So the secretary of my agency walks into the building with me in the morning, and he walks out of the building with me at night. We work the same hours. If he gets to leave, why don't I? It's not fair. Well, you can imagine how that conversation turned out and that I got to work some extra hours that week. Lately, we have been talking about Jesus' response to our lives, our common situations, and about what Jesus expects of us in our circumstances, what he wants us to be and do here and now. We've talked about Zacchaeus and how he looked for Jesus and how we can stop being the thing that blocks people from reaching God. But instead, we get to be like that tree that helps people to seek him. We've talked about blind Bartimaeus and how we aren't defined by our faults, that Jesus sees us and that he calls out to us. And last week, we talked about the woman who anointed Jesus with an expensive bottle of perfume and how Jesus is asking for our whole life and that he can be trusted with it. And right now we're leading up to Easter. Jake just talked about inviting our friends. And this is a time when we're always focused more on what Jesus said, what Jesus did. But we should always be focused on this. But it's this time of year when we tend to kind of hone in on his life and on his actions, because we need to know what he did and what he said. And so often we have these situations in our life that we face where we think, what does Jesus say about this? How am I going to know what God's perspective is? And so that's why we talk about these stories, like we've been talking about what Jesus said or what he did or what he taught. Because his life doesn't show us just what happened at that one moment years ago, but he models and he teaches how we respond to whatever comes into our own lives. How to help other people seek him, how to step into our identity despite our faults, how to live broken lives that draw other people into him. Jesus tells us everyday stories to teach us how to respond extraordinarily in everyday situations. Now tonight we're going to be talking from Matthew 20. All these stories are coming from the Bible, and it is so important that we're reading the Bible, which is why, if you don't have a Bible, we've got some out on the concierge cart. You can go grab one. Or if you have your smartphone with you, which I know you do, you've already RSVP'd to the Easter event, so you can pull that out. You can go to bible.com/app, and you can download a Bible for free. I use mine all the time, and we're also going to have the verses here on the screen with us. So like I said, we're going to end up in Matthew 20, where Jesus is telling us a story to teach us a lesson. But why is he telling the story? Let's look before the story. In Matthew chapter 19, there's this interaction that Jesus has with a young man who happens to be very wealthy. And the young man wants to know what he has to do to be able to enter heaven. And they have this dialogue. And at the end of the dialogue, Jesus says, you need to sell everything you have and give to the poor. That's hard. Jesus recognizes that it's hard for someone with everything to enter the kingdom of heaven. Not that rich people don't get to go to heaven. That's not what he's saying. But there is an attitude that this young man had. This attitude of it being about him and his wealth and what he had built up. It is hard for us to give up our preferences. It's hard to give up our desires, even our possessions, for others to seek Jesus. And so after this interaction, the disciples are looking around at each other going, well, who in the world can be saved? They're puzzled. They're trying to figure this out. And then Peter comes in. Do you have a favorite Bible character? Because I do. It's Peter. From day one, when I was 18 years old and I was reading my Bible the first time, I fell in love with Peter. Because I get Peter. Peter is brash. He is stubborn. He is opinionated, and he is always right. I don't know if any of you know someone in your life who is always right. Yeah, that would be me. I understand what he says. I understand his interactions. And so I love that Peter jumps up and he honestly comes in and he says, but Jesus, we've given everything to follow you. What will we get? What will we get? Yes, Peter, you're speaking my language. Come on, Jesus. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't go sleeping around. I moved to the desert from God's country in the Pacific Northwest. I got some Washingtonians in the house tonight. Come on. I moved to the desert. I give my money to the church and the missionaries and to my community. Come on, Jesus. What do I get? I am due. Don't look at me like that. Because you know you've asked that question too. It comes out in our comparison thoughts. In our thoughts of it's not fair. I work hard every day, and she just got all that for free. I'm nicer than he is, and he has 1 million friends, and I'm here alone. I eat right, and I exercise, but I got really sick. Why is she so healthy when she eats like a 15-year-old boy? What do I get? What do I get? It's such a dark question. Because that question of what do I get takes our focus off of what God is doing. And it puts it right on me and on what I deserve. And when I focus on what I deserve, I lose focus of everything good around me. Everything that God is doing around me. I get stuck in this comparison cycle in my head that goes round and round again where I think that I'm better than everyone else. Where I think that I'm better than that person and that person and that person. And the longer that cycle goes on, the darker it gets. The deeper we get stuck into it. It's not fair. It's not fair. It moves from one, it's not fair, to nothing is fair. It is hard when you're in that darkness to see the light of God. So here's Peter, who, by the way, is hanging out with the Son of God. Like, he's with Jesus, and he's saying, hey, Jesus, what do we get? And this is how I know that I get better than I deserve, because I would have kicked Peter out of the club that night. I would have been like, you're off the island, man. No more. You're done. I told you I'm a little bit like him. But Jesus didn't respond that way. Jesus is so much nicer than me. Jesus' response instead flipped Peter's thoughts upside down. He started by reminding Peter that whatever Peter gets in this life, it's not really the point of anything. Peter, you're gonna get eternal life. Like, that's what you're gonna get. It's okay. You don't need the stuff. You don't need to be so worried about the comparison. And then, after he reminds Peter, you're going to get eternal life, Jesus tells a story. I love stories. And I love stories because stories tell what God is doing. Stories in the Bible tell what happened, what Jesus wants to teach us, and stories in our lives tell what God is doing in us and through us and in our community. And let me tell you this, I'm just going to put a little advertisement right here. If you have a story to tell about what God is doing right here in Las Vegas, what God is doing in your life, come see me. I want to hear your story. Send me an email, text me, tweet me, Instagram me, whatever it is, tell me your stories because I want to hear what God is doing. Okay, back to Jesus. We're going to start in Matthew 20. It's the first story in this chapter. And it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went back to work in the vineyard. At noon, and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, 'Why haven't you been working all day?' They replied, 'Because no one hired us.' The landowner told them, 'Then go out and join the others in my vineyard.' That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner, 'Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat?' He answered one of them, 'Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I'm kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last.' So these people would go out and wait for work. The landowner would come, and he came at 6 a.m. because, you want a full day's work. So he came at 6 a.m., and there's a bunch of people there, so he hires them. And 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., 5 p.m., all of these people he hires. But I have a question for you. Those people who were standing around at 5 p.m., do you think they were there at 6 a.m.? I don't think so. Probably not. And you know what? That makes my fairness gene just cringe. It's not fair. I am just as bad as those people who showed up at 6 a.m. I might have had a calculator out going, all right, let's see here. What's 1/12 of a day's wage? And you get that because you worked 1 hour. And here's 3/12. And you get, I would have had my calculator out, and I'm pretty sure Peter had his out too. This story reminds Peter because he's sitting there on his calculator, and Jesus is telling him, Peter, you are so focused on yourself that you become the why of how you do things. The why of why you do things. Why give everything? Because of what it gets me. But is that the right reason? How many of you are parents? Did you have kids just for the tax write-off? I'm judging by your laughter that that's a no. No, you didn't have kids for a tax write-off for what it got you. No, you have kids and you get to raise them as humans who chase after God to tell his story. It's not about you. Why do we have teams of people who serve. Why is, I'm going to point you out, why do we have somebody running sound? Is it because people like to be like, hey, I'm the sound guy? No. It's so that we can have a welcoming gathering, so that people can see what's going on. They can read the verses and the songs on the screen. It's so that we can communicate God's story a little bit better. Jesus responds so kindly to Peter. Peter, buddy, the last will be first. It is not about you, but it is about serving others. It is about your attitude. Peter, yeah. The 6 a.m.ers, when they got there, they agreed on their price. They said, hey, we're here. We are willing to work for you for a full day if you pay us a full day's wage. The landowner said, agreed. I'll pay you at the end of the day. Go off and work. The landowner agreed with everyone else to pay whatever was right. The workers at 5 p.m. got to experience a generosity that they probably didn't deserve. A generosity that the 6 a.m.ers knew they didn't deserve. And this is the crux of the issue. The landowner was kind and generous to everyone. Every person who worked that day experienced his generosity. It was only those who were focused on themselves and on comparing themselves to others who were upset. Now listen, 2 weeks ago, many of you know my day job is that I'm a sign language interpreter, and I work in a call center. I interpret telephone calls. 2 weeks ago, my company decided that for everybody who worked this 4-hour block on a certain day, they were going to put their names in a drawing to win $150. $150! I wanted $150. I was so excited. I'm like, I'm going to win the $150. It's going to be mine. Just wait. So the day came, and the day went. Nobody in our center won. Like, it just sort of passed over, and we went, oh, that was yesterday? Whoops, okay. We all went back to our lives. And then we got another email. Guess what? We're doing it again. Next Wednesday. If you work these 4 hours, we'll enter your name in to win $150. So I'm messaging my friends. I'm like, come on, let's do this. Let's do this. We're going to win this. We're going to win $150. So the day comes. All of a sudden, we get this message from our boss. Guys, guess what? Jesse just won $150. And we're like, whoa, this is real. It's happening. It's in our center. This is so exciting. So we're all like, okay, let's do this. Like, we're here. We're going to win. I mean, there's like 400 interpreters on, and they're giving $150 to 50 interpreters. The chances are really good. Okay, so we go back to work. We're doing our thing. Get another message. Guess what, guys? Vincent just won $150. Oh, it's getting real. We still got 2 more hours. Here we go. Okay, let's do this. So we're really excited. We keep working. We get another message. Guess what? Brooke just won $150. Time's running out. When are they going to say Emily's going to win $150? Because you know what? I love Jesus. And Jesus loves me. I know he's going to bless me. I mean, the last will be first. That means that I'm going to be the last one. Come on, Jesus. So I'm praying and I'm interpreting. And we get one more message and they say, the last drawing just happened. And Toby just won $150. And I'm like, excuse me? Toby just won $150? Where's my $150? I want $150. That is not fair. Why didn't I get $150? I want you to know that this was last week, after I knew I was talking about this section of the Bible. And I'm still railing against God. It's not fair. It was up to the company. The company did it so that we get more interpreters in. It was their prerogative, and they decided to bless their employees. That's not fair. So Jesus is telling this story to Peter to remind him that God has such a different perspective than we do. Those who you and I would place as first will be last, and the last will be first. And it's not to be unfair. It's not to deny Peter or the 6 a.m.ers or you or me. He wants us to serve him. He wants us to follow him without insisting on our way. So who are you in this story? Out of all of the characters, who do you think you are? And I will bet you anything that most of us said we're the people who show up at 6 a.m. I have read this story a lot. And I can tell you I have never once envisioned myself as anybody other than a 6 a.m.er. Never once. I would never show up at noon or horror of horrors 5 p.m. Never. But to be honest, sometimes I do. Sometimes that is what I'm doing in my life. But okay, fine. So let's say you're a 6 a.m.er. You're there at 6 a.m. and what has God called you to do? Maybe you feel like you're alone in that labor. You started working and you're the only one out there. You're in the scorching heat of the sun, serving and working with no one beside you. What is your prayer when you're out there working? What is your heart saying at that point? Are you feeling contempt? Contempt for God? Contempt for the people who come along after you? What took you so long? Why did you just get here now? You could have been out here 6 hours ago working with me. Or do you pray for help? Lord, send more workers. Let's rejoice together in serving you. And what about those people who showed up at 9 and at noon and 3 and 5? Maybe they were lazy. It's a possibility. But maybe they worked a double shift yesterday. Maybe they were taking care of their family. Maybe they just didn't know there was exciting ways to follow Jesus in service. We could get what we deserve, Peter, but more often than not, we get better than we deserve. And we get to keep inviting people along with us. And here is the beauty of the landowner, the beauty of Jesus, is that most of us do probably fall into that 9 a.m. or noon or 3 p.m. category. Not the 6 a.m. category. We haven't given over every single thing in our lives yet. We're broken, we're tired, we don't know how to respond in service to him. But I do want to speak directly to those who feel like you have been serving since 6 a.m. You have given everything. You're valiantly fighting that feeling of discouragement. Or maybe you feel yourself sinking into that world of comparison. Jesus is there. He knows. And I wish that I had words right now to fix that feeling like you're being left out or left behind or unseen, but I don't. I can't change that situation. But know this, you're not alone. There are others there with you who are working with you, who are loving Jesus with you, who are hoping with you. And more than that, Jesus is there with you. You are working alongside someone who loves you more than you could ever imagine. So stay at it. God's generosity is to all of us. His compassion is to all of us. Even when we feel like we've missed a promise or an action on his part, he still has a story to tell, and he wants you to be part of telling that story. So keep on. Do not get trapped in that darkness, because Jesus is calling you, loving you, and seeing you. You know, we all come from different circumstances. We all have different backgrounds. We've made different choices in our lives. I don't know what time it is for you tonight. But I know this. Jesus is coming around looking for you. He wants you to come learn his story. And if you've never followed him before, he's not asking you to come work for your salvation, for your relationship with him, for your eternal life. No, he's offering that free of charge right now. He's already conquered death to seek and save us. But he is also looking for people to tell his story. People willing to abandon Peter's question of, what do I get? And run toward the questions of, how can I be used? How can I tell God's story? How can I reveal him in my brokenness? And sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes we have to change our perspective to be able to hear him speaking to us. See, the 6 a.m.ers may have showed up on time, but they still had an attitude problem. And they got to serve. And the 5 p.m.ers showed up inexcusably late, but they still got to serve. All of them experienced generosity that they did not deserve.